Phil Mickelson thought he was the one setting terms. 6 majors, 3 decades of filling galleries from Augusta to St. Andrews, a name that anchored broadcast deals and moved merchandise without trying. He walked into the weeks after the Open at Royal Birkdale, believing the PGA Tour would come knocking, hat in hand. Instead, Brian Rolapp delivered a single sentence that ended a 30-year relationship. Mickelson had no answer, not one word. The word ultimatum has been circling golf since the Open closed. Mickelson's side floated it first, framing the story as if Lefty was the one dictating conditions. The truth runs the opposite direction, and once you hear what Rolapp actually laid out, the silence from Mickelson makes perfect sense. This was not a negotiation. This was a verdict delivered to a man who had already lost the right to appeal. 3 reasons locked him out while Cameron Smith got a path back. Not one of them is about his golf, and the first one starts with a conversation he thought the world forgot. You will hear each reason. You will hear the exact words Rolapp used to make it permanent. You will understand why 2026 left Mickelson with nothing to bargain with. I think Rolapp was right to draw the line, even if it hurts watching a legend get erased. Tell me in the comments if you see it differently. That conversation happened in February 2022, and Mickelson probably assumed the golf world had moved on. It had not. Not with Rolapp sitting in the chair. Before those 4 words matter, though, you need to understand what Rolapp built, because the structure itself is what made the exclusion possible. Without the structure, there is no mechanism to lock one man out while letting others walk free. Rolapp introduced what he called a returning member pathway. The concept is simple on the surface. Players who left for LIV and wanted back would get one window, one chance. Miss it, and the door shuts for good. No renegotiation, no second look. The language in his letter to fans left 0 room for interpretation. Once that window closes, the path disappears permanently. Cameron Smith was the first name attached to the offer. 2 major titles, a fan favorite, a player who left quietly, took the money, and never publicly trashed the tour on his way out. Smith got the pathway. Smith got the conditions laid out in front of him. Smith got a route back to the PGA Tour that he can walk down whenever he is ready. The conditions are not complicated. Smith has to commit to a minimum number of PGA Tour events. He has to accept the tour's scheduling requirements. He has to play by the same rules as every other member. No special treatment. No guaranteed starts. No exemptions handed out because of his name. Smith agreed to all of it. He looked at the terms, signed the paperwork, and started planning his return. For a player with 2 major titles and a fan base that stretches across 3 continents, the conditions were fair, reasonable, the kind of deal any rational person would take. Mickelson never got the chance to take it. One name on the list so far. Smith is not the only LIV player who received that offer, and the other names make Mickelson's absence impossible to ignore. Mickelson's name was nowhere in the document. Not buried in a footnote, not listed under a conditional clause, not mentioned as a future consideration. Absent, completely. Where every other qualifying player had a set of terms to meet, Mickelson had nothing written next to his name. The policy did not accidentally skip him. The structure was built so that his name could not fit inside it, even if a future commissioner wanted to extend an invitation. There is no clause for him, no exception for a 6-time major winner, no senior pathway, no ambassador track, no ceremonial role waiting at the end of the road. Every door that could theoretically open for a former LIV player was designed to swing open for everyone except one man. Here is the detail that should bother you, regardless of which side of the LIV debate you sit on. Smith has 2 majors. Mickelson has 6. Smith walked away quietly. Mickelson walked away loud. The policy does not measure loudness. It does not measure major titles. It measures something else entirely, and that measurement is what separates Mickelson from every other name on that list. The gap between Smith and Mickelson is not talent or wins. It is 4 words spoken into a microphone 4 years ago, and those words are about to surface. Those 4 words were obnoxious greed. February 2022. Mickelson sat down with a reporter and, thinking the conversation was off the record, called the PGA Tour's business model obnoxious greed. He also admitted he was helping LIV gain traction. He knew what he was doing. He knew the damage those words would cause. He said them anyway because he believed the tour would never find out, or if they did, they would need him too much to care. The recording surfaced. The quote spread. Every player on the PGA Tour who had stayed loyal, who had turned down LIV money, who had bet their career on the institution, read those words and felt the sting. Mickelson had not just left. He had called the people who employed him greedy to their faces, while simultaneously helping the competition recruit their friends. That is not a departure. That is a betrayal wrapped in a press conference. The fallout was immediate. Players who had known Mickelson for 20 years stopped returning his calls. The locker room, which had once been his kingdom, went quiet when his name came up. Younger players who grew up idolizing him, who modeled their short game after his, who watched his 2004 Masters win on repeat as kids, had to reconcile the man they admired with the man who called their employer greedy while helping the competition sign their friends. Some of them did reconcile it, most of them did not. That divide, that split between the players who could forgive and the players who could not, is exactly what Rolapp inherited when he took the job. Bryson DeChambeau also received the returning member offer, one major. A complicated relationship with the tour, yes. A player who pushed boundaries and ruffled feathers. DeChambeau left for the money, and everyone knows it. He never pretended otherwise. He never called the tour greedy. He never admitted to helping Liv poach players. He simply took the contract and went. The tour can forgive a man who leaves for a paycheck. The tour cannot forgive a man who spits on the institution while walking out the door. Two names on the pathway now. Neither said what Mickelson said, and that difference is the entire case. Missing 4 majors in 2026 was not the reason Rolapp locked Mickelson out. The policy was written before the season started. The exclusion was decided before a single ball was struck at Augusta. The collapse made the exclusion permanent in a way it might not have been otherwise. If Mickelson had won the Masters in April, if he had contended at the PGA in May, if he had shown up at the US Open in June and played like the man who won Kiowa Island at 50, the conversation might have been different. The tour might have blinked. The fans might have demanded an exception. The pressure to include him would have been enormous. None of that happened. Mickelson missed the Masters, missed the PGA Championship, missed the US Open. Then came the Open at Royal Birkdale. He withdrew before the first round, not because of a last-minute injury, because he could not compete. Because at 56, with no competitive reps in 12 months, the game had moved past him. 4 majors, 0 appearances, first time in his professional career. The man who once won the Claret Jug at Muirfield could not get himself to the starting line at Birkdale. Within hours of the withdrawal being confirmed, reports surfaced. Allegations of misconduct at a private golf club, details that painted a picture of behavior far removed from the charming, charismatic figure golf fans had known for 3 decades. Mickelson denied the claims. His team pushed back. The denials did not matter. The timing destroyed whatever remained of his public standing. A player who misses 4 majors is a player in decline. A player who misses 4 majors and faces misconduct allegations in the same week is a player the institution cannot protect, cannot promote, and cannot welcome back without answering questions it does not want to answer. Missing every major was the smallest of his problems. What surfaced within hours of that withdrawal made the missed cuts look like a vacation. Jon Rahm was the 3rd name on the returning member list. 3 majors, a fiery competitor, a player who left for the money and never pretended it was about anything else. Rahm did not burn bridges. Rahm did not call the tour names. Rahm did not admit to recruiting his peers for the rival league. He played golf, took the contract, and stayed quiet about the politics. The tour can work with quiet. The tour cannot work with a man who lit the match and then asked everyone to thank him for the warmth. Rahm is the 3rd name, and not one of those 3 spent 2026 watching majors from a television screen. The 3rd reason has nothing to do with what Mickelson said publicly. It has to do with what he represents privately, inside the locker room, among the players who stayed. Rolapp walked into the CEO role with a mandate from those players. The ones who turned down 8-figure offers. The ones who bet their careers on the tour surviving the Liv War. Those players looked at Rolapp and said very clearly that if the tour welcomes back the man who tried to destroy it, then loyalty means nothing. The message was not subtle. Reward the defectors if you must. Bring back the quiet ones. Do not bring back the architect. Do not bring back the man who made it all possible. Brooks Koepka already walked back through the door. 5 majors. A player who left, played Liv, and came back without drama. Koepka is competing on tour right now. He did not have to apologize on a stage. He did not have to grovel. He met the conditions, accepted the terms, and teed it up. The system works for players who left for golf reasons or money reasons. The system does not work for the player who left to build a weapon and then aimed it at the people who made him famous. 4 names now: Smith, DeChambeau, Rahm, Koepka. One man was left off, and his response to that exclusion was his final mistake. Mickelson did what Mickelson has always done when the walls close in. He talked. In the weeks after the Open, he made public comments suggesting the tour still needs his name. that fans want to see him, that his legacy is too large to be erased by a policy document. He spoke as if he still held cards, as if 30 years of highlights gave him veto power over Rolapp's decisions. Analysts responded with what one of them called a disastrous reality check. The tour is renegotiating media rights. Young stars are emerging. The schedule is being rebuilt. The world does not need Phil Mickelson in 2026. The tour survived without him. It is building without him. It will finish the job without him. 30 years of making sure the golf world listened to every word he said. For the first time, no one was listening. Then came the words that ended it. Rolapp was asked directly, point blank, whether there was any scenario in which Mickelson returns to the PGA Tour in any capacity. His answer was not a negotiation, not a maybe, not a door left cracked open for a future commissioner to walk through. Rolapp said, and I am quoting him directly, that he can promise one person you will never see in any way in an official capacity with the PGA Tour is Phil Mickelson. That bridge has been burned. Read that again. Never, in any way, in an official capacity, not as a player, not as a guest, not as a commentator, not as an ambassador, not as a man standing on the first tee at a senior event waving to the crowd, erased, completely, permanently, by the CEO of the most powerful institution in professional golf. The reaction from the golf world was split, predictable, and loud. Half the fans called it justice. They pointed to the greed comments, the recruitment, the years of damage. They said Mickelson had it coming, that no player is bigger than the institution, that loyalty has to mean something. The other half called it cruel. They pointed to the 6 majors, the 45 wins, the 3 decades of entertainment. They said Rolapp was punishing a man for doing what every other live player did, just louder. Both sides had arguments. Neither side was fully wrong. What both sides agreed on, though, was that the quote was final. There was no reading it as a starting position. There was no interpreting it as a negotiation tactic. Rolapp meant it. Every syllable, every bridge has 2 ends. Rolapp just told the world he owns the matches, and the question now is what remains of a legacy when the sport itself decides to forget you. 6 majors, 45 PGA Tour wins. The 2021 PGA Championship at Kiawah Island when he won at 50 years old, and the entire golf world stood up. The short game that made people gasp. The creativity around the greens that no one else could replicate. The charisma that sold tickets and filled broadcast windows for 3 decades. All of it real, all of it extraordinary, all of it locked behind a door that Rolapp just welded shut. Consider what the next generation loses. A kid growing up in 2027, 2028, 2030, who never saw Mickelson hit that impossible flop shot from the pine straw at Augusta. Who never watched him chase down a leader on Sunday with a driver in his hand and a grin on his face. Who never heard the roar of a gallery when Phil pulled off something no one else could see. That kid will see the highlights on YouTube, will read the stats, will know the numbers. They will not know the feeling. The feeling of watching a man play golf like it was jazz, like it was improvisation, like the rules did not apply to him because he was too creative to be contained by them. That feeling dies with the generation that saw it live. Rolapp did not just ban a player. He severed a connection between the past and the future of the sport. The Open is run by the R&A, not the PGA Tour. Technically, the R&A could still invite Mickelson. The claret jug does not belong to Brian Rolapp. Muirfield does not answer to a returning member policy. The political pressure is enormous. After what happened in 2026, after the withdrawal, after the allegations that surfaced within hours of that withdrawal, after Rolapp's public statement, the R&A would think very carefully before extending an invitation that could fracture their relationship with the PGA Tour. The Open might be the last major that could still let him in. After this year, even that door is creaking shut. Think about what it means when a sport decides to forget one of its greatest players. Not retire him, not celebrate him, not give him an honorary tee time at Augusta or a lifetime exemption at the Open. Forget him. Remove his name from the conversation. Build the future without acknowledging that he was ever part of the foundation. That is not a punishment for a bad round. That is not a suspension for a rules violation. That is an institution looking at a man who gave it 30 years of magic and deciding that the magic does not outweigh the betrayal. Is it fair? That is the question every golf fan is wrestling with right now, and I do not have a clean answer. 6 majors should count for something. 3 decades of entertainment should count for something. The man who won at Kiawah Island at 50 should not be erased like he never existed. At the same time, the players who stayed loyal, who turned down the money, who bet their careers on the tour, deserve to know that betrayal has a cost. If Mickelson walks back in with a smile and a sponsor exemption, what does that say to every player who said no to Live V? What does that say about loyalty, about trust, about the institution itself? The bridge is ash. Whether history remembers Mickelson as the man who changed golf or the man who burned his own legacy is an answer that will come from time, not a press conference. If you want the next piece on how Cameron Smith navigates his way back while Mickelson watches from the outside, subscribe. This story is not finished. Phil Mickelson spent 30 years building a legacy that no one could touch. It took Brian Rolapp one sentence to make sure no one ever will.